The broadcast is now starting.
Okay.
All
Hello,
right, well,
everyone. This is Rusty Shughart. He is, you're the chair of the ATA Government Linguist Outreach Task Force, yes?
Yes, right.
All right. And he is going to be giving us an overview of said task force, because I don't want to say that again. So I'll let him get started.
Okay, well, thank you very much, Jennifer. It's great to be here this evening. I had originally proposed with Jennifer to do this as a meetup back on the 11th of June is when we scheduled that. But of course, everything is upside down now with the virus that we're dealing with this year. So hopefully we can do this again in person in a meetup sometime in the future. And I suggested to Jennifer that we look at sometime next spring, as this task force, as you'll see in a moment here, has a 3-year sort of plan, and we will have some updates as we move forward. So basically, I'm Rusty Shughart. I live in Arlington. My address, email address is right there, rust4ata@yahoo.com. And I'm a part of the ATA government division. I'm a part of the leadership council there. I've been an ATA member probably for about 14 years. And I've been an active member of the government division for the past 3 or 4, but mostly with the Chinese division. And I've been with the Chinese division pretty much since I began my membership with ATA. So here's our agenda. I'll give you some background on myself and the task force. I'll talk to you about the Committee on Outreach to the Defense Language Community, which is sort of the nexus of this whole move to this task force. I'll talk to you about the committee members, the timeline, and some of the outcomes that we had from that original committee. That committee led to the establishment of the what we call the GLOTF, and that was approved by the ATA Board of Directors last year. And then we have a different set of task force members, a timeline, and then the outcomes from the GLOTF to date. And then I'll leave it open for questions. I understand from Jennifer that you can type your questions to Jennifer, and then she can relay them to me, and I will attempt to answer those for you. A little bit about myself. I'm a graduate of the Defense Language Institute in Monterey in the basic Chinese course. From that point on, I went to the University of Hawaii because I had a follow-on assignment to the Army at Fort Shafter. I got a master's degree and came back as an Air Force officer, and then I had a full 30-year career in the Air Force, both as active duty and a reservist. And I retired both from federal government and the Air Force in 2016. So since then, I've been volunteering my time to many different projects, but certainly one with ATA is this Government Linguist Outreach Task Force, where I am the task force chair. The government division was established in 2016. So prior to that, there was no real engagement between these two large organizations of ATA and the defense language community. And that we have some definitions for that. I'll show you some examples on how we describe the defense language community. But since we established the government division, or GovD, in January 2016, we've taken on this project as probably the most important outreach initiative, certainly that we have coming out of the government division. If you know Maria Brau, she established the government division. She was in the testing division, I believe it was, at FBI, and she's now retired. I think she's still a part of our leadership council, but I have not seen her at the recent annual meetings. So that's pretty much the background on the presenter and the task force. So basically, we had a lot of exchange of email in 2018, sort of a lot of evidence that military members aren't aware that ATA exists, and ATA doesn't really know how to engage the defense language community, particularly military members, enlisted members who, like myself years ago, had gone through the Defense Language Institute. And many of them continued on to active duty through a full career. They might have had a shorter career that just encompassed their particular term of enlistment, or they may have joined the reserves and had a career of a certain length in the reserves as well. So we, in response to these emails and discussions, we proposed that we develop this committee on outreach to the defense language community. And that consisted of some ATA members and some non-members of ATA that we could get together and discuss initiatives that would bring these two large organizations closer together, identify ways here to improve the long-term relationship with these defense professionals, and present a plan that could be considered for later that year, which was at our annual conference in New Orleans. And the plan elements would have proposed actions as well as implementation milestones. So we wanted to have some ideas on how to improve engagement and how to have a more strategic relationship, but also have sort of implementation milestones, so they weren't just a series of actions that didn't have some definitive timeline associated with them. These were the committee members. I had to craft a very interesting message. I had to ask each of these people if they would like to volunteer their time to help out. So I had to send a message, an email note to them saying, here's your opportunity to volunteer to help ATA in this capacity. You know, ATA is mostly an organization that is powered by volunteers in all different areas. And I was very happy to see that people stood up within ATA as well as outside of ATA to assist. You may recognize some of the names here. Dick Brecht worked with Ron Walton back in the 60s, looking at less commonly taught languages, and went on to have a terrific career in a variety of different language areas. His daughter is a company owner. She joined us. Kathleen Diamond, you may know her from the Association of Language Companies. Joe Mazza is now still the government administrator. And Joe is the chief of the translation division over at the State Department's Department of Language Services. Gail McGinn, she has her own consulting firm, but prior to that, she was the Defense Language Authority. So she was the head of the defense language issues, did a transformation roadmap and so forth on how to align the future for defense community linguists and so forth. Jeff Mitchell was also in a consulting group organization, but Jeff is the former commander of the 300th MI Brigade, Military Intelligence Brigade, out in Draper, Utah. So he oversees hundreds of language experts and manages the mission of language support, did at Draper, out in Draper, Utah. Glenn Nordine, you probably know Glenn. He's a subject matter expert. He's done so much throughout his long career on behalf of the foreign language community. Bill Rivers is our very important lobbyist, lobbying on behalf of the foreign language community with Congress. He's with the Joint National Committee for Languages. Monique Rosk is the ATA Assistant Administrator. She backs up Joe. And Monique is a company owner and president of M2 Language Consultants. So Monique was there to assist and provide her perspectives. I serve as the committee chair based on the time that I had in the military and the work that I did both on the civilian side as well as on the military side with the Air Force. And Ted Wozniak, who was also a graduate of the Defense Language Institute, was very interested in this committee and joined us as well to provide his perspective and give us a lot of great background on the ATA. That was long-winded, but here we go with our initiative for 2018 and 2019. Again, we had this exchange of emails and phone calls, stakeholders about the awareness and participation of military linguists in ATA programs and activities. And then we proposed this ad hoc committee with those members I just mentioned. We developed and had a approved mission statement that was given by the executive director of ATA. We had our first and second meetings after we formed our agenda in June and August. And then I met with everyone individually as well as having group meetings. We met at the State Department Annex as Joe hosted our meetings, but also I met with just about everybody. I think I might have missed one or two there, but I met with everyone separately to kind of refine our roadmap that we then presented to the ATA board. So in New Orleans, Joe Mazza and I went before the board, laid out our plan. We had some detailed documentation to describe what we would like to do. And that was later approved by the board. It was approved in the next year, actually in February, but we had some very good results from briefing the board on the work of the committee. And then we had hoped in 2019 to deliver our results to the Interagency Language Roundtable. That's the government-oriented session that meets at the State Department. And unfortunately, that meeting did not take place because of the government shutdown. So we had to sort of react to some ongoing challenges there. So that was actually postponed until later in 2019. Now, when we talk about the defense language community, we have a lot of foreign language expertise within DoD. You have your cryptologic language analysts, native speakers, interpreters. We got people who fly in the back of airplanes. We got military service, civilians, contractors, and on down the line. So we made a nice long list of where we have language expertise within the Department of Defense. On down the line there, you can see civilian instructors and educators. We have the defense attaché system, debriefers, interrogators, all the way down the line. But it was a little bit too much that we thought as a committee for us to handle that group in total. So we decided to target or focus more on a primary set of uniformed service members of the active and reserve components, recognizing that we have military service civilians and others on the list here that we can analyze sort of in a total force perspective, but we felt that the primary emphasis should be given to the uniformed service members of active and reserve components. So that's the active components, the reserve, and the National Guard, and it includes all the services to include the Coast Guard. So the Coast Guard is also a part of our initial effort here. And the issue here was that it would be too much for us to take on all at once if we took on the entire membership of the defense language community. So we ended up with about 30 recommendations from that committee that kind of fell into the large categories of communication, utilization, and transformation. That if you took those 30 or so and divided them and analyzed them in certain ways, it could fill these particular categories. So the first one was kind of an informational challenge that we felt that there wasn't really good marketing on the part of ATA within the government communities, that we didn't have good resource links, and that we didn't have tailored information from ATA toward DoD on its products, services, and events. So that would be the most important thing for us to do, would be to open new avenues of communication and begin with an informational kind of a series of informational actions. From that, we have a lot of other programs that exist, but we don't have ATA involvement in existing DoD programs or DoD involvement in existing ATA programs. So the action here among these initiatives was to leverage existing programs. So in enhanced engagement, outreach. For example, here on the slide here, we have tuition assistance programs, our transition assistance programs for people, linguists who are leaving the military. They're no longer going to be on active duty because they are retiring or they have fulfilled their membership service obligation. But we're not capturing those highly trained and experienced language experts within ATA. So we felt that was not an informational task, but more of an actionable task, that we need to rely and leverage more of these existing programs on behalf of both ATA and the actual defense language community. And the third category was that of transformation. Some things would need to be initiated or established as new initiatives, and that would be more strategic in sense. And it would involve a long-term partnership in terms of program management and delivery. Also, we'd focus on professional development and we want to have what we call broad return on investment, and then broadly defined term return on investment. Well, those 30 initiatives we whittled down to 20, and here you see at the top, it's still the same structure. We have communication initiatives, utilization initiatives, and transformation initiatives, and they're informational, actionable, and strategic. So here among this first category of initiatives, which we just put the C in front to remind us when we get into the planning process which one we're talking about. Improve ATA marketing, establish an information line and Dropbox, develop a comprehensive briefing that's tailored to the defense language community about ATAs, products, services, and events, and so forth. And then the initiatives that we had here were to coordinate our marketing outreach with the defense language community leadership. This is often pretty tricky because the leadership often has vendors, commercial vendors, and so forth approaching them for products and services. ATA, we've had to underscore that we're a not-for-profit organization as we try to engage the leadership on what ATA can do for military linguists. At the same time, we also talked about not trying to encourage linguists to leave the military, or not trying to poach qualified linguists, but let them know that they can have a much longer career in the translation and interpreting industry beyond just their term of military service. And we also wanted to integrate our literature into their transition assistance programs and on down the line with these programs. If you look at U5, for example, we have a lot of Department of Defense schools in Japan, Europe, Taiwan, other places, and we've got usually children of military or government personnel stationed in those countries going through schools, and we want to touch base with that crowd to let them know as young students what the potentials are in terms of leveraging their language skills, their cultural experiences, having lived in these countries for a longer term career. So right now, I think those things are missing. So we have a DoD outreach program, and that's one of our initiatives, is to get the word out there about ATA, using ATA's existing school outreach program. So I think ATA has had the school outreach program for many years, but we've never directed it towards the Department of Defense schools in any way. And finally, over here on the right, in transformation, again, we're looking for more long-standing types of connections, establishing routine liaison relationships with key organizations, creating academic partnerships. T3 is an interesting one because the military members, almost everyone on active duty, has access to the GI Bill, but we don't have a lot of great academic partnerships to develop non-resident T&I degree programs. So when they come out of DLI, whether it be DLI Monterey or DLI Washington, they sometimes have an associate's degree. I think maybe they all do now, but there's no follow-on step for them to move on to the bachelor's level in terms of getting a degree that's focused on T&I and would be a non-resident program. So our implementation schedule, the committee then proposed that we tackle certain initiatives in year 1, others in year 2, and then the remaining ones, and they're not necessarily listed here by difficulty, but just pretty much by communication, utilization, and transformation. Those 3 things we discussed, we looked at just a few minutes ago. This was our concept that we, in 2019, we could begin with the communications piece, establish the mechanisms, and sort of get out there and meet some people, let them know that ATA is interested. We have this government division. The division has this interest. And then, again, utilization, we would build upon the success of 2019. And then the transformation piece, we would build on the success of 19 and 20. So I didn't know that we'd have government shutdowns and coronavirus and all of that. But so I think our progress has been good, but not maybe a straight line as you might hope. But we did have this concept, at least, that we have to be successful in year 1 to be successful in year 2. And I think that our momentum is a little bit slowed here this year, but I'm confident that we can get back on track and move forward. So again, we decided to take on these first 8 challenges, C1 through C4 and U1 through U4, and the others would be left for the follow-on years. And in that first year, this is sort of a proof of concept type of approach, where if you've got a big project, you want to have some confidence building and prove that you can move forward successfully and not encounter too many roadblocks or be able to work around any kinds of issues that might pop up. And we couched that in terms of what we called a pilot project for 2019. So those 8 proposed initiatives from the categories of communication and utilization, we packaged into a pilot project. And that includes the marketing, establishing the linkage, having an ATA comprehensive briefing. This is an area here, these tips are very interesting. We're working on what we call translator interpreter pathway summaries. And these would be summaries for military members on how they can make the transition, tips on how they can transition to the commercial sector in leveraging their language capabilities. So right now I've got a pretty good draft of those, even though we're into 2020. I still have a pretty good draft of these, and we're going to try to have this be a booklet or perhaps some articles in some transition magazines, periodicals, and so forth, but those are still being developed. We also tried to coordinate our work with the Defense Language Program leadership, with the Command Language Program Office. There's an office out in Monterey that oversees all of the continuing education training by linguists once they depart Monterey. These TAPs are transition assistance program materials. Normally when you're about to retire or separate from the military, it used to be a 30 days before you separated, you go through a transition assistance program. That's been changed now, I think, to 1 year. So it's a chance for us to meet with the military linguists who are about to depart the military and let them know about ATA's product, services, and events. And here we are at webinar and podcast. We want to get the word out in using vehicles such as this webinar and podcasts, and that will help in terms of sharing the ATA story for our targeted community. Well, that was an overview of that committee, and then we moved on to the new task force members. So we retained Joe and Jeff continued with us, and myself, of course, and Monique and Ted, who was the president-elect at that time, is now the ATA president. We added Ben Carl from the membership committee. We added Ann Connor, who was the chair of the ATA Public Relations Committee. And we added Allison Carroll. She does executive coaching, and we felt that she would be good to add to our committee, our task force here, in terms of providing that career development perspective. She's got lots of great resources and background in executive coaching, but I think I think that her expertise applies across the board. Here's our timeline. In February, the board of directors approved the Government Linguist Outreach Task Force. That was 2019. Then we had a good case where Monique and Jeff went out to the 300th MI Brigade at Draper and let them know that ATA is developing an engagement plan. So that happened right after the GLOTF was established. The GLOTF met. Our first meeting was at the headquarters in Alexandria. We met again in June. And then our government shutdown delayed presentation took place on the 21st of June at the State Department, where we stood up and presented in a panel session about ATA and what it could do for the government and military communities. And that included Ted Wozniak, who came in and represented ATA as the president on the panel. That went out really well, except we had a short problem with a brief issue with that, and that we had only 38 people attend that session. So normally the ILR can have 100 or so, but for some reason, I think it was the last meeting of the year there on 21 June, We had a smaller gathering than we would have hoped for, but it was still our first chance to actually engage the government community on behalf of ATA. Our third meeting on the 12th of September allowed us to get our program together for the 25th of September, where we presented on ATA's professional development programs at a DoD Language Education and Resource Network workshop. So that was the first time that ATA had ever been invited or attended such a session, and we were given a full hour to stand up and provide a good overview of ATA's professional development opportunities. And in that case, Ann Connor, who is living in New Jersey, she came down to join me. So Ann and I were able to participate in this Learn workshop and had really good chance to meet everyone, because we were able to attend the rest of the workshop and not just the hour that we were allotted. Then last year at Palm Springs, we briefed the results of the GLOTF to date, and that brings us kind of to the end of 2019. In 2020, we met on the 14th of February, again to prepare ourselves for the next upcoming event. That event was on 7 and 8 March, where myself and Ted Wozniak and I traveled out to Draper, and we had a presentation on ATA's professional development programs and initiatives. We shared a table with another vendor. We had a lot of good opportunities to interact. I made about 10 really good contacts in terms of command language program representatives to help get the word out on ATA's programs. So that was really I say a very worthwhile initiative to get us there. Now you see I have the 5 stars there. These were things that I had on the calendar, but eventually I had to cancel or postpone. I had a meeting with the advisor for foreign language and culture at the Undersecretary of Defense for Intelligence and Security on the 19th of March, and I just missed that because the Pentagon had just shut down. The Pentagon had just shut down a couple days before that. So that was an important meeting, because that individual oversees a lot of the foreign language expertise within the military, and I need to make a connection with him to, again, try to get a liaison type of relationship going in terms of sharing ATA story. We also plan for David Stevenson, who's the chair of the ATA Certification Committee, to join us in the plenary session, and actually the committee session too, at the ILR on 22 May, but that was also postponed or canceled. I say canceled, but we're hoping to have David hopefully volunteer to come up and do that again with the ILR, perhaps next spring, depending on the results of the virus situation here. And now on the 11th of June, I had hoped to have this discussion with you in a meetup session, but now here we are on a webinar on the 24th of June, which is certainly fine. And I do appreciate, I understand from Jennifer that we exceeded the 25 number for the purposes of Yondo here, but we're all going to try to put this, we're trying to put this onto the ATA, NCATA website as a reference in the future. So if you were unable to make it, or you know someone who would like to review or be a part of this, you can look for that to be posted on the NCATA website at a future date.
Yeah,
and we hope to.
It'll actually be
I'm sorry?
posted in 2 places, and I'll send them out.
Okay. Okay, perfect. Thank you for clarifying that. All right. And then our 5th meeting is coming up next week. We're going to have a dial-in session because we cannot get together. And I don't know about ATA Boston 61, but that was our next step, was to brief the results to the government division. Last year we did that. We had about 50 or so people attend in Palm Springs at our session. That was really quite terrific. So here are our task force outcomes, and I'll just discuss these kind of generally. So I think we've done a pretty good job with the marketing initiatives. We now have the information line and the email drop box. We have an 877 number, toll-free number to contact ATA, 1-877-215-7282. That's an 800 number. So military members who are interested in ATA, they've seen a briefing or they've heard from someone, can just call that toll-free number and get information on membership. We've got a lot of good, in C3 here, we have a lot of good comprehensive content. We had no content when we started, and we built a pretty good program here over the course of time with lots of good details on what ATA offers to the defense language community. And again, those are pretty much in terms of products, services, and events. So I think we've done a pretty good job with that. The tips, the translator interpreter pathway summaries, I think those are coming along fairly well. And I should have something that would be ready to be looked at for publishing probably by the end of July. So we're pretty close to that. Again, everything is being done here in a volunteer basis. So as people travel or have other projects, it's hard to kind of keep these things on a very tight timeline, but I think we're making progress in all these different areas. We've had some good coordination with the language leadership. Unfortunately, that meeting I had in the Pentagon was postponed. I need to reschedule that once we're able to get back together. We're trying to engage the Command Language Program Office. They're out in Monterey. They have an annual conference in August. I don't think that's happening this year. I need to check on that as well. But that's a nice forum for us to distribute materials at that Command Language Program Manager Seminar that takes place in Monterey each August. Our literature, we're still working on that. The podcast, the one reason I'm here in this session is to have a webinar and help fulfill this requirement, this initiative, and so forth. We've not yet contacted the DoD education activity, but I think that's a fairly easy one to handle. It's just a matter of making the right contacts. U6 here, greater use of ATA chapters and affiliates. So I would encourage you as we move along as a NCATA to try to engage the defense language community more robustly if possible once we get into a position of being able to share information on language expertise. This is quite important here, this U6. I was a member, I am still a member of the Chinese language division there at ATA, and it's almost entirely comprised of ethnic Chinese. There are very few Westerners who are in that category, in that category of being able to provide this type of language service. I guess mostly because we're adult language learners. Maybe our skills never get to that level of being able to normally, I guess, in being able to work at that level. But also, again, because many military linguists who have training in Persian and Chinese and Korean and Arabic, again, they don't know that these programs exist within ATA or much about ATA itself. On down the list, we're still working on the GI Bill programs, credentialing. We want to underscore the importance of credentialing and professional development so that a military linguist might be more promotable if he or she has some credentialing or some sort of certification from an organization like ATA. And on down the line, one thing I did want to mention was T4 here. We were looking at mechanisms to eliminate or reduce ATA membership costs. And just last month, the ATA board approved military membership at a 50% discount from the normal associate membership. So new members who want to want to join ATA can get a 50% discount off of the annual membership rate. Again, that would be individuals on active duty in reserve capacity, National Guard, to include the Coast Guard. So we've already had, I think, one person in the last 2 weeks. It's only been up 2 weeks. One person has already signed up with the military discount, and we haven't yet started our marketing campaign. And that's something we're going to discuss in our next GLOTF meeting on 1 July, how to market the program and the fact that we have this temporary military discount. This is like a discount that ATA offers for a student level, but it's for members of the military. It's just for a brief period of time to see if we can encourage some members to consider ATA and join ATA to see what the association is all about. T6, looking at a letter campaign just to underscore to the DoD leadership the importance of foreign language education, as well as the development of translation and interpreting skills and so forth. And that's kind of the outcomes that we had here for the task force to date. We're still, I guess we're only in month 15 or 16 in the 3-year plan. So hopefully we'll make more progress on this. And I can also give you an update on that progress in a future meeting. Okay, well, that's about the presentation here. It looks like it's 7:07. Again, I gave you the background on myself and the task force. We talked about the Defense Language Community Committee. And I was very happy that I had volunteers to help me with that. I talked to you about the Government Linguist Outreach Task Force and how we're looking at a much broader number of government and military linguists, but we're focusing now in terms of this veterans outreach on active and reserve component members. And I gave you the timelines of both the committee and the GLOTF, as well as our outcomes. And I'm at a point now where I can accept any questions.
Okay, so the first question we had a while back were, are the slides going to be available?
Yes, yeah, I can send you the slides. If is that normally how you do it, Jennifer? Do you take the slides and then send them out?
I send out if
Okay.
That's possible.
Okay.
So
all right. Yeah, I know I went through the slides very quickly, so certainly you can review it, I guess, when it's posted, but I'll also send you a copy of the slides as well.
All right, great. And so we have a question here that says, are other government institutions, other than DoD involved, like the State Department or the Commercial Department?
Well, at this point, we don't have an outreach initiative to the government civilians yet. We have a lot of civilians who work in these different agencies, who work language issues, either program managers or recruiters, a whole bunch of different job categories. But right now, we're not involved in those non-DoD government organizations at this point. But it is a part of the government division's scope, which includes the federal government as well as state and local governments. The government division of ATA has a fairly broad scope of interests and responsibilities there, I guess, on behalf of ATA. That's a long answer, but the short answer is that we're focusing primarily on uniformed members, uniformed linguists, again, active and reserve component military members.
Great, thank you. And we have a question here that says, how can we, as regular civilian interpreters and translators, help?
Well, I don't know if I need much more help at this point in delivering the things that I showed you, the 20 initiatives that I showed you. If you interact with DoD linguists, you could help sort of inform them of ATA's interests, the existence of this task force, and the types of things that we're doing. But I don't know that I need any more help with the task force itself and the other tasks. Let me look up at the tasks here.
While you're looking that up, I
don't think I have a lot of requirements at this point.
Okay, well, I have a question for when you say if we interact with DoD, linguists, and we can direct them to the task force. Do you have any pamphlets or informational materials that we could probably send them?
Right. Yeah, I'm working on those. We don't yet have those types of materials. I do have. You can share the this briefing with them if you'd like. I don't have any materials yet. I'm working on those tips, and when those are ready, that would allow people to read up on the whole range of programs that we have out there on how linguists can remain in the language business once they separate from military service. There's a whole group of possibilities out there. The Veterans Administration has a lot of programs on veteran-owned businesses, how to get started, how to manage a business. We have the Troops to Teachers program, that is run by DoD that will help language qualified people move into the classroom. There's a whole range of different programs out there. The National Security Education Program with the Boren Awards Program has a lot of different possibilities. So there's a lot of ways that language personnel can remain in language once they're no longer serving as linguists. But I don't yet have a pamphlet or any detailed documentation on that. We're still kind of putting that together.
Okay, thank you. And
the issue there, Jennifer, is that we have probably more information than less information. So there's so many different government programs out there to support language learning and utilization. It's kind of more challenging to kind of put that together into a coherent package. So hopefully we'll have some articles in some journals, and we might have a pamphlet or two that we could distribute. But right now, those things are still under development within this task force.
all right, great. And is there any information for students, at the DLI or like any information for them about translation and interpretation opportunities?
No, it's interesting, Jennifer. The DLI, whether it's in Monterey or local, because they do have some contractors who teach a significant number of languages locally, they focus mostly on language learning and less on job skills development. So given an extra 40 or 80 hours in the program there, they would focus on global proficiency development and not necessarily on interpreting skills or translation skills, those types of skill development tasks. So, their job there is to get their students out with the highest level of global proficiency as possible, but not necessarily have any specific job skills, because these students will go on and have different types of jobs. And again, the main focus at DLI is just to emphasize global skills development. So hopefully we can get out there at some point as an ATA and join with DLI in presenting some of these things about possibilities of leveraging these students' language training in a longer term career. We don't have really good data, but our sense is that a lot of linguists separate from the military after serving their 3 or 4 years of obligation, and then they don't really leverage their language. Again, I don't have a lot of great detail data on that, but I think many of them go back home. They don't even pursue their language development in terms of a longer career. So I'd like to have more data on that, but I don't think that type of data actually exists. So.
All right, great. Thank you. Are there any more questions? I haven't seen any pop up.
Okay. Well, let me close out here, Jennifer, and just say that if you have any questions, feel free to send me a note here. You can reach me at russ4ata@yahoo.com, and hope to see some of you at some point down the road. Hopefully we can get together as part of a meetup, and I can give you an update on this sometime next year. But feel free to contact me between now and then. I'd be happy to get back to you with any questions you have. And also, if you have any ideas on how you can support our effort, get the word out, let people know what we're up to, I would greatly appreciate that as well. So thank you also, Jennifer, for arranging this. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, we appreciate you taking the time to give us an overview of this very interesting task force, and it seems to be, moving along despite coronavirus, so that's good.
Exactly.
And so if you could just move your cursor like just a little bit upwards. Okay, yeah. So just in case people didn't see his email before, it's russ4ata@yahoo.com.
Absolutely.
All right. Well, thank you so much. And
okay. Thank you, Jennifer. Thank you, everyone. I appreciate it.